Folks, Hennie Heymans is the Managing Director for DHL Express. He's our next speaker. Hennie, if I can ask yourself to get ready to come up to the stage. I attended a conference a week or two ago that Hennie spoke at, and I think what he's going to focus on today, at least I hope what you're going to focus on today, is the customer centricity around leadership. It's absolutely critical that you manage expectations correctly, that you deal with problems, and I know that one of the driving forces behind Hennie's management dictum is that notion of humility. And Hennie, I'm hoping, I don't want to steal your thunder, but at some point in your short address, I'm hoping you're also going to work into your speech the parking bay story, which I think is critical.
Jeremy, good morning. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. If I can just ask for the clicker. Don't know where the clicker is. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute privilege to be here with you this morning. As Jeremy said, I look after, and I have the privilege of looking after DHL Express, thank you, in South Africa. And oftentimes when we get to opportunities like this, people would ask, well, why DHL? Why you suddenly become an expert on customer centricity or on management? So behind me you can see some of the statistics, a few of the wow stats we talk about, some of the touch points that we have, some of the opportunities we have to interact with customers. Now that certainly, ladies and gentlemen, does not make us experts insofar as management is concerned, or insofar as customer centricity is concerned. But I'll tell you what it does provide us with. It certainly does provide us with an opportunity to have an opinion on issues around leadership and issues around customer centricity. So for my 15 minutes, I've been asked to look at some of the characteristics as to what makes up a successful 21st century manager today. What is required in modern business today to stand out and to be a leader and to be somebody that people would eventually look up to, and for us to become mentors. And the question, and there's been a couple of good questions already this morning, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a mentor, or do you want to be a mentee? Do you want to be a leader, or do you want to be a follower? Well, I hope over the next 15 minutes I'll be able to give you a couple of pointers, certainly in terms of what I believe and what we believe in at DHL. What are some of those characteristics in order for us to be successful 21st century managers? But before I look at that, I cannot help but think why all of a sudden management and leadership has become so important for us in South Africa. You open up a magazine, you open up a newspaper, and we read more and more about leaders. We read more and more about what it takes to be a successful leader. So I'm going to play you a short video, which hopefully will give a little bit of perspective why suddenly it's so important for us to look at leadership.
This is Africa Rising. 1 billion connected Africans are speaking out. That's just not true. Conflicts, not entrepreneurs, will rise. Corruption and red tape still strangle our economies. New jobs and opportunities are still non-existent. Poverty will prevail. It's wrong to declare that we will rise up on the wings of our own making. Africa cannot be turned around. It's unwise to believe that we will. But we can choose to reverse this. We will. It's unwise to believe that Africa cannot be turned around. We will rise up on the wings of our own making. It's wrong to declare that poverty will prevail. New jobs and opportunities are still non-existent. Corruption and red tape still strangle our economies. Conflicts, not entrepreneurs, will rise. That's just not true. 1 billion connected Africans are speaking out. This is Africa Rising. DHL, committed to Africa Rising.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I guess in South Africa in particular nowadays we talk about leadership. Because we have an amazing opportunity. We have an amazing opportunity to, through our leadership, to take leadership on this wonderful continent and to turn this continent into a continent of power, a continent of leadership, and a continent that can start looking after itself the way it was intended to. But the journey around leadership is a little bit like a GPS, right? Now, most of us know GPSs or own a GPS. I, for one, because I'm probably slightly older than the average age in the room, struggle with a GPS. But fact remains, I do have a GPS. What I only recently discovered is, in order for the GPS to actually work effectively and to take me to my destination, I need to understand where I come from. And the journey for leadership is no different. So we're going to have a quick look at the then and now. And as I said earlier on, and Jeremy is very strict with the time allotted, so I've only got 15 minutes. So I'm going to try and run through it really, really quickly. But it's important for us to understand how leadership has evolved, not just in Africa, but around the world. Where do we come from? And why would we require the characteristics that I do believe, and we at DHL believe, that you would require to be a successful 21st century manager? In the early 70s, and if you think back to your parents, people had a job for life. And in South Africa in particular, for those that are Afrikaans speaking, die Suid-Afrikaanse spoorweë, the South African railways. And my son, if you can get in there, your pension is guaranteed. Remember that? For most of you, it'll probably be your grandparents. In my case, it's my parents. Okay? But certainly in the early 70s, it was about having one job. The relationship from an employer perspective was command and control. We did not engage. Management did not engage. It was an absolute command and control. There was no management on an individual level. At best, people were referred to as resources. People wanted to have a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Nothing more and nothing less. There were very formal relationships between management and employees. In most instances, managers were addressed as sir or ma'am. Now, as you'll know today, that doesn't happen anymore. And if it is happening, I would absolutely encourage you to change that, because there is no place in the modern workplace for those kind of formalities. But in the early 80s, we started seeing management going through a revolution. That revolution was led by the employees. Employees wanted more choice. Employees wanted to start talking about a career. They wanted to develop. And because there was more choice, it had a direct impact on loyalty. So employers could no longer bargain on the I want a job for life scenario. They suddenly had to start thinking as to how do I keep my employees loyal? How do I keep them investing their energy and their knowledge back into my business? So we suddenly had to start managing against objectives and quality frameworks, and we started talking about behaviors. Suddenly we had to start thinking differently about the command and control scenario that we so like. Employees started talking about financial recognition. A fair day's pay for a fair day's work no longer worked. Employers had to adjust in the 80s. And how did they have to adjust? We call it MBWA, Management by Walkabout. And you see a little bit later on how that gets exercised and practiced in the modern society. People wanted to build careers. As employers, we had to start providing frameworks. We had to provide that GPS that I referred to earlier on. We started talking about emotionally engaging with people. Now, what does that mean? And a little bit later, I'll touch on the dangers of what potentially could happen through emotional engagement. But suddenly, we couldn't just arrive at work and go to our corner office with a beautiful view and the leather couches. We had to start showing an interest in our people, and that interest had to be a genuine interest, because that's what employees demanded. If not, well, they suddenly had more choice. It was also the same time that unions got introduced into business. There was a lot more legal cases, CCMAs, labor courts, and so on and so forth. So the entire environment became a lot more legalized, a lot more controlled. We could no longer just issue instructions. Employees wanted to understand why they have to do something before they commit it or before they execute it. Employees wanted to understand, what is the value? What is my role in us achieving those targets? And what is the financial benefit for me as an employee if we achieve those targets? And then finally, demand to work-life balance. Jeremy opened up and he started talking about 16 and 18-hour workdays. We'll talk a little bit about renewal and the importance of renewal and why renewal is important. Because in today's life, and we heard one of the speakers talking about Twitter, the technology has certainly changed our lives and will continue to change our lives. But not will it only change our lives, it'll also change the way in which we manage and how we execute and carry ourselves as leaders every single day. Because here's the one thing we should never forget as leaders. People join brands, but they leave people. And we leave people because we don't like their behavior or we don't subscribe to the same set of values. So as a leader, and one of the questions I'd like to leave you with is, does your behavior reflect leadership? Does your behavior attract people to become your mentee? Because ladies and gentlemen, I reiterate, we join brands, but we leave people. Finally, employers realized that service excellence was no longer just about the customer centricity to your external customer. Service excellence, like the saying goes, charity starts at home. That service excellence has to be amongst colleagues too. It has to be amongst peers. Because if you can't live that behavior at home, you have no right to preach that behavior to the outside world that's paying mine your salaries. So as you can see from the 80s to where we are today, leadership has gone through a massive evolution. And it will continue to go through that evolution, ladies and gentlemen. You heard the first speaker talking about the importance of regularly reading and updating yourself and keeping yourself up to date. Because at the speed things are working today, somebody mentioned 2.4 seconds, you will be left behind quicker than what you ever thought is possible. So, what does the makeup of a successful 21st century look like? Now, the link for me to the first speakers, he spoke about having a clear purpose. And in my personal opinion, nobody said it better than Barack Obama when he said, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we have been waiting for. I want you to read that one more time. You are the ones you have been waiting for. The change, ladies and gentlemen, starts with you and me. The leadership starts with you and me. We can no longer point the finger outward and say, we expect leaders to do the following. That finger, ladies and gentlemen, when you look in the mirror, points right back at you. That's where leadership starts. Starts with taking responsibility. At DPDHL, we define leadership as having synchronized head, heart, and guts. And in its most simplistic form, it means that with your head, you provide a clear direction, a sense of purpose, a strategy we heard earlier on. But all of that is built around creating sustainable growth and profitability for your organization, whatever that organization is that you belong to or that you're busy creating. The heart, it's about understanding your people and working with people and developing people. Because I hope that you'll remember from the previous slide, the evolution of management is now such that employees have that demand and that rightful demand to want to be developed. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call the heart part of the leadership characteristics. Finally, guts. What does that mean? It most simplistically means doing the right thing according to a clear set of values. Never forsake your values. One of the most important things about leadership, and we heard both previous speakers and Jeremy talking about, sometimes as a leader you've got to take tough decisions. Sometimes being a leader is not as glamorous as it may sound or appear in articles and books and newspapers. Because sometimes in life you have to take really, really tough decisions. But most important is that you never forsake your values. And if you can get that synchronized, if you get that right, and if your behavior reflects that, ladies and gentlemen, every single one of you will become an amazing leader. And potentially we may see the next CEO for Old Mutual sitting in this room. But I bet you if over tea you go and have a chat to the current CEO, he'll talk about his values and the fact that he's never ever forsaken any of those values. What else are we looking for? In fact, I had an interview yesterday looking for somebody, and I said, can you describe leadership for me? What does leadership mean? Can you succinctly describe in one sentence? And ladies and gentlemen, for me, leadership is about not only the emotional engagement, but about every day getting up and motivating and inspiring the people around me, the people that I work with, the people that I have the privilege to lead today to make DHL the logistics company in South Africa and around the world. Sits around one's ability to motivate and inspire people. And we have some wonderful examples in South Africa, and I'll close off the presentation in a couple of minutes with the example. We don't have to look abroad. We don't have to look to the Americas. We don't have to look to the Japans and the Germanys of this world. We have some homegrown leaders that have certainly blasted a trail for us. Where do you spend your time as a leader? If you're still of the notion that you spent that time in your corner office, ladies and gentlemen, I'd urge you to rethink. We have to, as leaders, spend at least 70% of our time with our people, in amongst our people. You've got to take a call with your call center people. You've got to go and deliver a parcel with your courier. You've got to go and sort parcels with your sort staff at the gateway, and whatever the industry is that you may be in. You've got to sit in front of your customer and listen to the voice of the customer. Understand what that customer is looking for. A one-size-fits-all no longer works in today's economy, ladies and gentlemen. So a true leader spends the bulk of his time in front and amongst these people and with these customers. And that will become a critical characteristic for you and for me as we will continue our journey to becoming great leaders. I've spoken about the motivate and inspiring people. And the last part that I want to touch on is what we call the renewal zone. And if you look at an energy grid and you look at the quality of energy versus the quantity, there are more or less 4 blocks. You can either be, as they call it, the academics will refer to it as the tactical zone, or the burnout zone, or the renewal zone. It is critical to understand at what point you have to go to a renewal zone. And what does renewal mean? It does mean sometimes you've got to put down that cell phone and let that Twitter account go and ramble on. Because once you get into that renewal zone, you get the opportunity to think big picture. You get the opportunity to spend your time not firefighting, but thinking how you want to change that direction that you want to provide. How do you want to better engage with your people? And earlier on, I referred to the danger of engaging. Believe it or not, there is a danger when you engage. And one should never turn that engagement into emotional blackmail. And sometimes there's a very thin line between engagement and turning that into emotional blackmail. And what do I mean with emotional blackmail? Always be sure that you never ask people to do more than what you would be prepared to do yourself. And as long as you understand that difference between engagement and emotional blackmail, you will become a great leader. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to close off by simply saying, be the leader you want to be. Do not wait for the fancy title. Do not wait for the corner office. We've had a great example in South Africa. If we look at Madiba, for 27 years, he led us with no title, with no corner office. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all the very best in your journey on leadership. Thank you.
Hennie, don't feel too bad about the GPS thing. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Seriously, I still use those big map studio books. And I found the traffic from Monte Casino to Emperor's Palace fairly challenging this morning because that's where I went first. So don't worry about it. It's fine. It'll be all right. Very quickly, I don't want to leave you in suspense, but I attended a conference that Hennie spoke at a couple of weeks ago, and it was a small, silly little thing, but it made such an impact on me. You didn't refer to it. 2 seconds, I'm going to. Do you want to just start? Have you still got your mic on? Just quickly come up and just tell me the parking bay story. Because you forgot about it. And I just think, to me, it encapsulates servant leadership. It encapsulates understanding what it means to lead from the front. What did you do at DHL Express?
Thanks, Jeremy. So when I took over about 25 months ago, I found it difficult to engage with some of the staff because the first question they asked me is, so where are you parking? I said, I just park in a parking, right? No. And Hennie, are you downstairs in the basement? How big is the parking bay in the basement? And only after kind of discovering for about a week what people were on about, the status back then was determined by the size of the parking bay that you got in the basement. And I took a decision, and one of my previous colleagues, Pretty, and there she's waving at me, was there when I made the call.
That's not Pretty Yende, by the way.
And I threw out all of the directors and all of the senior management out of the basement. And I said, absolutely not, because the other parking bay we have is probably about 80 meters that you've got to walk. And the decision was quite simple. We talk about a servant's heart when you're a leader. And often when we have town hall meetings, people would say, well, Hennie, it's really difficult for the ladies with our high heels. The paving is destroying our high heels. Or when it rains, we all get wet and the laptop gets wet and so on and so forth. And there was no ways that we could stand at a town hall and say, yes, I understand what you say, unless we experience it for ourselves. The other thing it also made is it suddenly made senior management accessible for normal employees because they weren't judged by the size of the parking bay that they held at the office. And it made an enormous difference. The parking base today is allocated firstly based on whether there's medical reason for it, and if we have any pregnant ladies, and then finally, we now divide it up for the oldest employees that we have. So that, in short, ladies and gentlemen, is my parking
There
bay
you
story.
go. I mean, I think it touched me. I think it's clever. And Hennie's really taken this whole parking thing to heart. He actually parked at OR Tambo today and walked to Emperor's Palace.